About a year ago, I used to own the 16mm f1.4. Now, I was pretty happy about it. However, in May 2021, Fujifilm decided to release the XF 18mm f1.4. Now, I was not really convinced at the time, but decided to give it a try and see for myself if I would like the lens or not. After a few days of testing, I personally shared with you that I was impressed by this lens, and I finally decided to sell my 16mm to invest into the 18mm f1.4. It's now already been a year, and in today's video I want to share with you my experience with the 18mm f1.4 after a year of use. Alright, so first, how do I use this lens? Number one, for street photography. I usually go out in the streets of Tokyo using either the 18mm f1.4 or the 33mm f1.4 from Fujifilm. The 18mm f1.4, being a little bit wider, really allows me to capture subjects within their context and show a bit the environment in which they evolve. When I'm shooting portrait, I also enjoy using the 18mm f1.4 because it allows me to again represent a subject within an environment. This lens has little distortions, so it allows me to take portrait pictures without changing the subject's proportion, and it is ideal to take wider portraits, environmental portraits, which is what I basically enjoy taking when I use it. And finally, I use this lens to shoot videos. Now, the video that you're watching right now is shot on the 18mm f1.4, and also pretty much all my videos that I shot for the past year. Now, this is my use case. What is yours? Let me know in the comment because I'm really curious to know how people use this lens and if you own it or not. Okay, so now that you understand how I use this lens, let's talk about what I like and I don't like about the lens. First, the negative. And actually there is only one point that I wish Fuji would fix on this lens, which is its aperture ring. Its aperture ring is way too loose to my taste. If you compare it, for example, to the 16 to 55mm f2.8, the aperture ring there is much tighter and feels much more solid. The aperture ring on the 18mm f1.4 feels like it can move out of place at any time you use it, which is not exactly what you want. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the negative for this lens. Alright, so now let's get to the positive aspects when it comes to this lens. First, the image quality of both stills and video is just amazing. This lens is extremely sharp. From my experience with it, it performs the best from f2.8 to f8, but is still super sharp at f1.4. When mounted on my X-T4, it works beautifully with its 26 megapixel sensor. Now, that being said, I haven't been able to test any 40 megapixel sensor yet, well, because they haven't been released yet, right? And I'm really looking forward to test this lens that is supposed to be able to render 40 megapixel images with the new X-H2 or maybe X-T5 sensor that we will see this year. Autofocus is something that I really enjoy about this lens. For my use cases, it is something that I really value because when in the streets, if you cannot use autofocus, you have to slow down the way you shoot, which is not a bad thing, but that's not what I want from an autofocus lens, right? Same thing when it comes to portrait shoots. If I'm trying to shoot portraits of people moving in their environment or making some slight movements within studio, etc., I want a lens that is able to follow me and my movements, right? And the 18mm does exactly that, even on my X-T4, whether it is for video or when shooting stills. What is great about working with the 18mm f1.4 is that you don't need to think that much about it. You know that it will allow you to capture what you want. You don't have to think about its limitation and how to work around it. When it comes to the weight and how it feels on my camera, well, the weight doesn't bother me that much, honestly. It's not as light as the Fujifilm lenses, but it's not a heavy lens by any means. It fits perfectly in my bag whenever I want to bring it to the streets, and it's quite well balanced on my camera when I want to carry it around. And since I purchased this lens, honestly, I often have either the 18 or the 33 stuck to my camera because they pretty much allow me to do 90% of what I want to do. So after 1 year of taking portrait, street photography and videos with it, I can comfortably say that the 18mm has met and even exceeded all my expectations. And of course, its aperture ring makes it that the lens is not perfect, but it's pretty close to it. Now, who is this lens made for? I think that if you're looking for a wide-angle lens with good autofocus, good image quality, with little distortion, and that you will also be able to use for video, And if you're also looking to invest in the future into a 40 megapixel sensor from Fujifilm, then definitely this lens is made for you. It is definitely pricey, don't get me wrong, it's $1,000, right? But at this price, you can be sure that it will perform. But before you invest that much money, you might want to see how it performs, right? Then check out this video right here where I take this lens, the 18mm f1.4, to the streets of Tokyo. See you there.